So now the X-Men franchise really has reached its low point. X-Men Origins Wolverine. Now, X-Men Origins Wolverine came out in 2009 and has a lot of problems. It's not good, guys. I don't think anybody was expecting me to praise this movie because this movie is pretty universally hated. And after watching it again, yeah, it's not good, but it is not boring either. I did not turn this movie off and be like, oh, this is so dull and lifeless. It actually had a lot of personality to it, all of which is just horrible. It's not good, but it is kind of in that so bad it's good kind of way. And because it does have a certain amount of nostalgia for me, I was young when I saw this movie. I had no idea who Deadpool even was when this movie came out, so I didn't really hate it. I kind of walked out of it being like, oh, that was a good, fun Wolverine action story, but you know, you grow up, you read some comics, your opinions, they change a little bit. But again, it is an entertaining kind of bad. And I'm going to get my praises for this movie out of the way before we really look at all the horrible creative decisions that went into the production of this movie, because there actually are some things that are effective. There are some things that I enjoyed in this movie, and one of which is Hugh Jackman as Wolverine. Now, Hugh Jackman always brings it as Wolverine. He can do this role in his sleep, and he kind of does. Now, his accent does slip a little bit here, and I think part of that is because they filmed a lot of this movie in New Zealand, which is not all that far from Australia, and there's probably a lot of people speaking in a New Zealand or Australian accent, and I could imagine his accent slipping a little bit more when he's surrounded by those people versus a mostly American shoot that was for the other X-Men movies. Now, does that excuse the fact that he just is kind of nonchalantly walking through this movie? No, but watching the credits, I was like, oh, that does make a little bit more sense. But accent aside, Hugh Jackman is always entertaining. He can give that Wolverine snarl. He can howl in pain and suffering. He can sell his character really well. And whenever he's on screen, it does make the movie a little bit better. My only real issue with his portrayal is that they just don't really know what to do with his hair. His hair is all over the place in this movie. Some scenes it looks a little bit more traditional Wolverine. Other scenes it looks really matted down. And others it is just frizzy going all over the place, just out of control. I don't know who's in charge of Wolverine's hair in this movie, but man, it is wildly inconsistent. But another thing that I didn't find horrible in this movie is the cast in general. I think Liev Schreiber, if given a better script, could have made for a really awesome Sabretooth. And he's pretty good in here. He's intimidating when he needs to be, although some of the character choices are a little questionable, like having him run on all fours and pounce on people like a cat. It doesn't scream Sabretooth to me. You know, Sabretooth has always been this like 7 foot tall, intimidating bear of a man that just has claws and fangs, and you know, that's not exactly the route they went with Sabretooth. So, you know, for comic book accuracy, I do give it some points off. But Liev Schreiber, again, does a pretty intimidating job as Sabretooth. And the same goes for the rest of the cast. Danny Houston is fine as Stryker. Taylor Kitsch was a fun Gambit. We all know Ryan Reynolds was born to play Deadpool, so that casting is obvious now. Will.i.am, well, you know, I'm not exactly sure why Will.i.am was in this movie. It just seems like very out of place. And I guess that's all I have to say about that. And really, the only other praise I can give this movie is that the action scenes, while going from a bit cliche to completely over the top and ridiculous, they are a fun kind of over the top and ridiculous. There's action, there's a bit of character, and there's a lot of personality. All these actors bring a good amount of charisma and personality to their roles, so you can buy into them as people. You might just not be able to buy into the script and some of the creative choices that were made, because this movie is rough, especially when you look at it from an X-Men Origins Wolverine perspective, which is the title of the movie, and you know, we're supposed to see the origins of Wolverine. And when the movie opens up in pre-Civil War Canada and we're in this cabin, you see what Wolverine and Sabretooth's home life was like, I was actually kind of invested a little bit. I thought it was actually not a bad setup. Now, Wolverine and Sabretooth aren't brothers in the comics, but their powers are similar enough, and I see it as kind of like how in the Tim Burton Batman movie they had the Joker kill Batman's parents. Now, that's not exactly comic accurate, but for a self-contained little story, I thought it was appropriate enough, and I feel the same way here about Wolverine and Sabretooth. They have this rivalry in the comics that seems to go back eons, and to have them brothers here, I think it does add a little bit more character, a little more depth to their relationship than just two guys that hate each other. And then we get what may be the best part of the movie, and it's the opening credits. The opening credits sequence where we see them go through war after war, fighting alongside each other, and then you see Sabretooth get more and more of a bloodlust over the different wars. That does help to establish our characters. We have Wolverine, who's definitely a fighter, he's a survivor, and he's willing to throw down with anybody. But then we have Sabretooth, who's the same way, but even more aggressive and just does not care about human life. And that's all well and good, except that our characters don't evolve from that. By the end of the credits, they are already personality-wise where they're gonna be by the end of the movie. Sabretooth is this bloodthirsty, sadistic animal, and Wolverine is a fighter, yeah, but he's kind of got this heart of gold. And I feel like that was mistake number one, because it would have been really cool to see bloodlust become a real problem over the course of this movie, and then Wolverine having to deal with, you know, loyalty to his brother versus actually standing up for what he believes in. I feel like Wolverine's character was done such a disservice because, you know, in the X-Men movies, they've always teased about how horrible the Weapon X program was, the kind of work that him and Stryker did together, that if Wolverine knew what his past was, he wouldn't want to know. We don't really see that in here. We see them go on some missions and they kill people for whatever purpose, the greater good or whatever, but they didn't do anything that reprehensible that a regular soldier wouldn't have nightmares about. But when the Weapon X team goes to Africa, and this is really the one mission that we see with the Weapon X team, it's Wolverine, Sabretooth, the Blob in his pre-fat phase, Will.i.am's character, whatever he's called, Wade Wilson's pre-Deadpool, and then Zero, who I think is supposed to be Maverick from the comics. I don't know why they changed his name. And this is the one mission that we see with the team. Would I have liked to see more missions with the team, build that camaraderie, build all the ins and outs of the Weapon X program to really understand at what point did Wolverine feel like they were crossing a line and then get out, because this is it. They just go to Africa, they try to get this adamantium ball, they're trying to figure out where they can get more of it, and then they massacre this entire village. And yeah, that's probably taking it a step too far, but this is also the scene where Wolverine leaves the team, his first and last mission. So yeah, we don't really see a lot of the team. We don't really see what brought Wolverine to that point, the stuff he did before, the stuff that they're doing now, if it's different at all. We don't really know that, so it just kind of rings as hollow that, oh, he's the good guy, so we can't have him do anything reprehensible, even though the whole draw of Wolverine is that he's done a lot of reprehensible stuff in his past, and we just don't see any of that here. We see Wolverine as the good guy throughout the entire movie, and that's just kind of weak. Now, the movie does kind of shift gears after that, because now it's no longer about the Weapon X team. Now it's about Wolverine wanting revenge on Sabretooth because he killed his wife, Kayla. And I guess she's supposed to be Silver Fox, although nobody calls her Silver Fox, and it's not really explained much who she is, where she comes from, except that she's the sister of Emma Frost, and yeah, that's cool, I guess, but doesn't actually add that much to the story. So now Wolverine's out for blood, and he partners up with Stryker to get the adamantium bones to make him indestructible so he can actually kill Victor, because he didn't really know how to kill Victor up until this point. They had a couple fights and he got his bone claws smashed in, so he's like, all right, I need some upgrade. And now we've got the adamantium in him. And the scene where he goes under the water is the thing that was in all the trailers, the process, the injection of adamantium. And if we're going back to X-Men 2, all the flashbacks that we saw, this should be a rated R body horror kind of scene. This should have you white knuckling it on the edge of your seat, just the pain and suffering that this man went through. Because if you go back to X-Men 2, it's really kind of alluded that they had to cut him open, peel back the layers of flesh and muscle to then directly inject each bone with adamantium to graft it to his skeleton, which is an incredibly disgusting and horrific procedure. And the fact that Wolverine had to be awake for this whole procedure because the anesthesia doesn't work on him makes it even more horrible, because just the pain and suffering that this man went through to get the metal on his bones, even though he volunteered for the procedure, this is some horrific stuff, and makes sense why his memories would be erased or repressed because of just how traumatic that whole thing was. In this movie, we get none of that. We get a PG-13, watered down, completely safe procedure where he's just underwater. You got little needles going into his skin and they're injecting the adamantium like a syringe. And then you see in the x-ray it covers his bones. It's a very minimally invasive procedure. and just not at all what anybody, I think, expected from the flashbacks that we got in X-Men 2. On that level, this whole thing just kind of feels like a walk in the park. Sure, he almost died, but, you know, it's Wolverine. You know he's always going to come back. And I don't think anyone expects him to stay dead. He just pops right out, trashes the place, and runs out, hides in a barn, and gets picked up by Ma and Pa Kent. Why? I don't know. It's a superhero origin story. I guess they needed a kindly couple to throw in to be cannon fodder for the third act, so yeah, why not? This movie's already got a dozen action movie cliches. We can throw in a couple superhero cliches too. And it's here where he's recuperating in this barn. He discovers his metal claws and he looks at them, and I don't know why they look so horrible in this scene. Now, I know there's actually a worse version out there that was leaked online before the movie was even finished, where it literally looks like cartoon, not even rendered, you know, X-Men claws. And that probably put a lot of pressure on the digital effects team to try to get these claws looking nice by the time the movie actually was released, so that they could show like, hey, that's not what it looks like. This looks so much better. And it does look better. Still doesn't look good though. It just looks a little too glossy, a little too clean, a little too floaty in the composition, because it really doesn't look good. Now, in all the X-Men movies, the Wolverine claws have always looked good. They've used a mixture of CGI with practical claws, and I think that works really well. And in this movie, they do use practical claws for some shots, but this movie really does like to rely on a lot of CGI claw shots that just don't hold up all that well. And this scene in the bathroom just looks the worst out of all of them. It looks horrible. And as a first impression for his new adamantium claws, it just does not look good. It's probably the worst scene that they could have had shoddy CGI. And you think in this first reveal scene, you want them to look clean, you want them to look real, you want them to look perfect. But like you might expect, this kindly couple, they die, they bite it, Zero kills them. And now Wolverine is not only going after Sabretooth, he's going after Stryker. And what he finds out is that Stryker and Sabretooth and Kayla are all working together to manipulate Wolverine to get their Weapon X program moving forward. Or really, it's the Weapon 11 program. That's the one that they're really building towards. And who's Weapon 11? Well, it's Deadpool, but not really, not at all. They basically took everything that was right about the Ryan Reynolds, Wade Wilson that we saw in the beginning of this movie with the Weapon X team and stripped it. They sewed his mouth shut, which was mistake number one. Now, I could see it as kind of like a troll move that, Merc with the mouth, we're going to sew his mouth shut. It's going to be so funny. The fans are going to laugh. No, because for one, it's not funny. You just sewed his most defining feature shut. Don't do that. And then the second thing is, he's not really Deadpool as much as he is this amalgamation of all these other X-Men powers. And after I finished the movie, I was actually really trying to think about, like, okay, how did they come to such a bad decision with regards to Deadpool? And I think it has to do with the grounding of the X-Men movies, trying to make them more realistic, trying to shy away from the comic book craziness that are in the comics and just try to make it more realistic. That's been baked into the X-Men movies since day one of X-Men 1. They've tried to make these realistic. And I guess they looked at Deadpool and were like, okay, how can we make him realistic? Well, we can take his suit and we can basically make his skin resemble the suit. We can, do a bunch of experiments on him. We can give him the tattooing that kind of looks like his Deadpool suit. And then we can sew his mouth shut to make it look like he's wearing a mask. Isn't that convenient? And then we can give him the Deadpool eyes by having his eyes change to Cyclops eyes, so that when it changes and he does his laser beams, which Deadpool does not have laser beams, so okay, that's mistake number one. But it does create the, Deadpool mask around the eyes. So the fans will love that, right? No, we don't love this. Listen, producers, just because you get the aesthetic of a character right, or there's homages to the aesthetic of a character, doesn't mean you have the right to completely destroy the essence of the character. We will be a lot more forgiving on a less comic accurate suit or appearance, as we will if that character is well represented in the writing, in the performance, in just the embodiment of the character. Wolverine didn't put on his classic yellow spandex suit until Deadpool and Wolverine that came out this year, and we still were backing Hugh Jackman 100% from X-Men 1. So really, you don't have to jump through all these hoops to give us a comic accurate or comic homage appearance if you're destroying the character, because Cyclops laser eyes, not part of Deadpool's power set. Giving him the swords in his arms to make him look like Baraka from Mortal Kombat, not part of Deadpool's power set. He's got katanas, sure, but they're not built into his body. On top of that, stripping him of all personality, all autonomy, and just having him be this mindless drone that Stryker types commands in on a keyboard and then he does them is just not Deadpool. And it just puts such a sour note on this whole third act, because once they get to 3 Mile Island, after a really fun exchange with Gambit, again, Taylor Kitsch's Gambit is fantastic. I love the scenes that he's in. Sure, they get a little cartoony, but Gambit's a fun character. I love Gambit in the comics and in the cartoons, so seeing him here, I was really happy that he actually got something to do. And then they just don't use him ever again. They just write him out of the movie. He pops up here and there, but he really doesn't do anything cool. But in the third act, it is all about Deadpool, and you actually have Wolverine and Sabretooth teaming up against Deadpool, and then they just kind of go their separate ways. Wolverine takes a couple adamantium bullets to the brain, and that's how he loses his memory, which to me just reeks of lazy writing. There's 1,000,001 different explanations they could have come up with as to why Wolverine's memories are all scrambled, and this is the one that they settled on. It just reeks of desperation. We're like, oh yeah, we'll just shoot him in the head. His brain will heal, but his memories, they're gone, right? And that's really how X-Men Origins Wolverine ends. It is a disappointing adaptation of the comics. It is disappointing if you're a fan of Wolverine and want to see his Weapon X days fully realized in a movie, how his experimentation went, everything that's been built up in the X-Men movies previously about his backstory now gets explained, and it's just kind of lame. Everything in this movie is just very undercooked, it's cliched, it's unoriginal. And probably the worst flaw about this is that it's all a safe, run-of-the-mill PG-13 FX matinee on cable action movie, and that's really all it is. And I feel like if they really wanted to tell the Wolverine origin story and do it as explained in the comics and also just as alluded to in the X-Men movies with all the pain and damage that Wolverine goes through on a daily basis, this movie would have to be rated R. It would have to be like Logan, but, you know, set in the past instead of the future. It would have to have that kind of tone and just not pull any punches with the horrific stuff that Wolverine did back in the day, and then just how awful that experimentation was. Because if we see just how brutal and horrible that whole process was, now we actually have a lot of sympathy for Wolverine and want to see him succeed. But now I turn over to you guys. What do you think about X-Men Origins Wolverine? Has your opinion softened on it a little bit? Because honestly, it is bad, but it's an enjoyable kind of bad. It's not boring. It's fun if you just want to kind of laugh and poke fun at it the whole time. But whatever you think, let me know in the comments. And if you like this video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe for more content, and hit the notification bell to be notified every time I upload a video. And as always, I'm Colby. This is my nerdy talk, and I'll see you in the next video.